All right. I think we get started. Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? I'm Victor Rivero. I'm Director of Data Transformation and Architecture in Virgin Media O2. And today, I'm planning to walk you through some of the work that we have been doing with the Monte Carlo team on start implementing data observability as part of our data transformation program. The title of the session says at Telecom speed. Right now, I think we are at speed, but the reality is that at the beginning of our journey, we actually had a few bumps and things were not going that fast. So today, what I'm thinking is also to walk you through some of those challenges we had and lessons learned that we took. So hopefully, if you are in a similar journey, you can take on some of those lessons learned. So before we go and we talk about data observability, also I would like to get you to Virgin Media O2 and some of our wider data strategy. So Virgin Media O2, so we merged two very well-known UK household companies in 2021, Virgin Media and O2, and now we are basically one of the UK largest telcos. So we have around 45 million connections. That goes around 15 million customers. And that's across our broadband network, our mobile network, and also our B2B and wholesale business lines. So if you guys think about it, that's a lot of customers, a lot of connections. So that's actually why ensuring data quality is really important, because any single mistake, any issue can potentially have like a rippling effect across many of our customers and the services that we provide. Beyond that, we have a strategy. First of all, we are heavily investing on improving and extending our network, our full fiber network across the UK, and also enhancing and improving the quality of our mobile network. And all of that is with a focus on really becoming a data-driven organization and also being customer-centric. So this point about our strategy, about becoming customer-centric and being data-driven, is where our data democratization strategy and program comes into place. Well, over here, when we talk about this program, data democratization, here's a picture of my boss, Mauro Flores. He's the one leading the program. Some of my colleagues will recognize him here, around here. We got this quote from Mauro just that I think summarizes quite well what is our vision. So at Virgin Media O2, we're seeing the power of data democratization come to life by giving colleagues the tools and confidence to use data every day. We are making faster decisions, improving customer experiences, and uncovering new commercial opportunities. This is vital to reimagining how we serve our customers, empowering our people, and leading the next generation of connectivity. So quite a lot for a mission statement, so I want to remark a couple of points over there. First, making faster decisions, because that's the outcome that we are achieving. It's not just about creating fancy dashboards or like AI latest model. What we are seeking is to really make sure that those are powering real decisions that drive value. And secondly, empowering, because this is all about empowering all of our employees. So we make sure that they have access to the data they need, but also the skills that they need to make those decisions. And explaining in more detail that point, that is not just about business intelligence and dashboards, which is a fundamental part of our strategy. But when we talk about data democratization, we normally talk about different pillars that support that transformation. So in addition to BI analytics, we have Data University. So we have a team that actually goes across the organization, driving data literacy, creating learning paths, and making sure that people get the training they need. Data culture is another amazing team that we have that is all about creating excitement on actually how we can get data embedded in our day-to-day jobs. And adoption on success, which is basically just to make sure that those products that we create and we deliver, that they actually deliver the value that we are expecting to deliver. Finally, and this is where we are going to focus today's conversation in more detail, we have the other pillar, that is data governance. And when we talk about data governance, which normally is a term that sounds boring, but to me it's very exciting because it's fundamental, because it's about building trust in data to enable decision making. And how we do that? We are building like a different set of capabilities over there. And I'm listing there some of those. And we also work with different partners very closely to build those capabilities. But the key one that we have and that we are going to explain today is data quality and observability. And we think that's a fundamental piece on building that trust in data so we can make those decisions. And by the way, when we talk about building trust in data and we talk about data governance, but another way of looking at this, and I'm pretty sure that you guys have heard this term in this couple of days, maybe 20,000 times, is AI readiness, which is another fundamental way of looking at building those capabilities in this context and in more strategic point of view. So if we start talking about data observability, and before we go into actually what we have done and how we have done it, I would like to explain a term that I think it has been coined by our Monte Carlo colleagues, but it's the concept of data downtime. And data downtime, they define it as any period when data is missing, late, incorrect, or structurally changed. So decisions, reports, or models can't be trusted. So data observability is to minimize this data downtime. Why? So the way that we think about data downtime is about the impact that we have in the business when we are in that situation. And the way I also think about it, and I've seen this not working well in my company is, and maybe it's a question that each of you can also think for yourselves, is who is detecting the issues? When we have a data issue, who is the first one that suffers the consequences or that identifies that? I don't know about you, but in Virgin Media O2, many times is actually the business users, the consumers of that data, the ones that they actually spend too much time just figuring out what's going on wrong, what is the issue, troubleshooting the issue. And even worse, some issues are actually the end customers, the ones that they're actually realizing about first. So the impact is massive, right? If we talk about customers, it's really bad customer experience, but also impact and potentially churn, which is a fear word in telco. So this is why it's so important that we go about it. And now what I'm going to do is step in and just explain a little bit how we got started. And what we have done is basically already to deploy the solution in a number of critical pipelines in our data landscape. We plan to start scaling this, following the blueprint that we have here that we have already iterated a couple of times and we have seen working. So I will briefly introduce the steps of this framework or blueprint, and then we will dig deeper in each of them. So first of all, we integrated the platform. Is about making sure that we connect all the components in our data stack and we drive interoperability to drive value. Secondly, is just understanding how we set up ourselves to actually operate and run the solution. Also, like I said, we are taking like an incremental approach. So it's about deciding where do we go, what do we monitor next, and how we prioritize the workloads that we take in. Also then deciding, and we will explain this later, what do we actually monitor and how. And over here we'll talk about what I call broad and deep monitoring. Then also alerts and notification, very important how we set up the right balance between number of alerts that people get. So we actually find the right balance between the noise and meaningful signal. And last one, measure for success. Very important to actually make sure that we are really progressing and driving value. And also that measurements are also an element of driving behavior for adoption and best practices. Like I said, this is an iterative framework, and now we will go a little bit deeper in each of those categories so we can explain some of the things that we did and some of the lessons that we took in our journey. First of all, our data stack and how we connect the solution there. So this is a high-level view of how our data stack look like. And the technology components in there. So first of all, our main data platform is BigQuery. We have moved in the last few years most of our data. I will never say all data because I don't think that's possible. But most of the data and the relevant data we need for analytics is in BigQuery. And more importantly, inside BigQuery now what we are building is what we call business layers. That is basically we are building a single source of truth using a domain-aligned model that we want to set as the foundation for analytics and AI. Then all that information is being surfaced and served to our users through Tableau. That is our main analytics and visualization tool. And then another component that is very strategic for us is Atlan. It's our data catalog. And over there, we are basically gathering all the metadata around data assets, data products, and we are also making it very relevant for data teams to start consuming that. Last, dbt and GitLab. So dbt, well, platform we use for data transformation, and GitLab for code management and DevOps. So all of these tools are basically feeding information to Monte Carlo as the observability platform. And the area where we have seen that all that information becomes really useful and relevant is when we use Monte Carlo at the moment of incident resolution. So we can use the tool for many things. The most important one is detecting when an issue is happening. But actually, when we are troubleshooting the issues, it has become really useful to see all the lineage that the tool provides, but with all the additional information that is overlay over the lineage in terms of dbt model execution, merge requests that happen, and also metadata information coming from the catalog. So we have seen that those are multipliers and really useful on some incidents that we have had in the last few months. So we explained about the technology, integrating the platform. To be honest, that was probably one of the easiest pieces, right? We know that it can be done. But then where we found more challenges and where we had more complexity is when we start thinking about how we set up ourselves as an organization to actually run and make use of the data. So it's complex. This diagram here, it looks pretty complex. But actually, the thing that is trying to depict is even more complex. That is our data landscape. So if we go from sources in the left all the way to end-user-facing products on the right. So it's a very complex environment and landscape. Different reasons. Sometimes it's just like we keep dragging technical debt and legacy solutions. But the good news is that the way that we can configure the observability tool and align it to our current operating model and how our teams own different parts of that landscape, which is still complex, but at least we can configure the solution and start routing alerts to that structure. So what we have is, for instance, on the right, we have like the domain teams that are looking at the analytic products and user. And then on the left, we have more people that are working on ingestion and backend data management teams. So in each of these teams that we can configure in the observability tool as a domain, what we are doing is that we are establishing a community of data quality champions, we call. And we have realized that this is fundamental, has been instrumental in us making progress. Initially, we didn't take this approach, and we struggled. But we have realized that actually observability is not so much about the technology, but we actually have to drive a culture shift. And we actually have to get a community of users to get to know how to use the tool, what is the value that they can drive with that. So that community of data champions has been really useful. And then what we have is a central team that looks at the platform itself, but also coordinating with the community in terms of best practices and standards. OK, and then, so we have the technology platform. We know how we are setting ourselves to run and operate. Then is, OK, what do we actually monitor? How do we get started? Like I said, we didn't want to go for a big bang and start monitoring everything. We thought that that could have been overwhelming. So what we did is just actually create a lightweight process where we decide, OK, what are the key value data products or data pipelines that we were to start monitoring. And that's the way we look at it, right? It's like we want to prioritize value and also crawl, walk, run, right? Take learnings as we go. The other reason that we have this process for prioritization, and it's obviously it's not free to monitor everything, right? It has a cost, so we also have to understand what is the cost of monitoring each of the workflows, and it's kind of a light touch cost-benefit assessment that we do before we start introducing more workloads into the tool. So we have the technology, we have the operating model, we have pick. Initially, we picked just 2 data pipelines. That's the way we started. Right now, we are around 6. So then how we go about monitoring, right? And this is, to me, one of the most interesting parts. It's like when we look at a pipeline, basically, we have 2 ways of monitoring. First of all is what I call deep monitoring. And deep monitoring is where we ask our data quality champions with the knowledge that they have, to identify what are the key assets within the pipeline and start introducing their dedicated and custom monitors per specific attributes and business rules that we want there to monitor. We can do this in 2 ways. One is by using custom monitors, leveraging the ML anomaly detection functionality that we have in Monte Carlo. We have found that very useful because you can set up reasonably complex monitors in just very quickly. One that we find quite useful is, for instance, within a given table, we look at the different dimension values and segmentation. And per each of the values in that dimension, we can look at anomalies and changes in the trend that can be raised an alert. And also the other thing that we do is we still develop some of these dedicated quality checks and monitors on DBT. But even if it's in DBT, it doesn't really matter, because at the end, we connect everything through the same observability platform. And in case there's a DBT test failing, we also get the alert through there. So that's deep monitoring. But what the thing gets also more interesting, and this is what we could say that is the real observability, is when we jump into what I call broad monitoring. And this is not just now picking a few assets, but this is about just applying monitoring across all the pipeline. I said all the pipeline, but it's not really all the pipeline. What we do is we actually establish some default policies that apply to what is monitored. So for instance, we may have some staging tables where we don't think that there's much logic applied. It's probably just a copy from one area to another. So we have rules that automatically detect those scenarios, and those tables are not being monitored. But this is where, by using Monte Carlo, we can actually start monitoring in an automated way what are those unknown unknowns. And we have monitors, machine learning-driven monitors for freshness, volume completeness, and also changes on the schema. So again, these are the 2 types of monitors that we can set up. And something important to say is that this is not fixed, it's dynamic. And what I mean is the way that we have been working on it is like sometimes we will get an issue on a broad monitor. And then once we start learning about that issue, actually we realize that, oh, let's build a custom monitor that is focused on that issue, because this is something that can actually happen again. So it's a learning process, and we keep incrementing on some of the custom monitors based on what we learn. And next is So once we have the monitors, the next step is basically, OK, how do alerts get to the teams, and how teams start interacting with those alerts and start figuring out and resolving the issues. So this is one of the areas that, honestly, I've enjoyed the most, just seeing the teams interacting. I think it's also driving a different behavior in terms of ownership of data when teams start really acknowledging and working on these alerts. I'm quickly going to go through one example. So this is an alert that we got some time ago. And basically, this alert was, if I remember well, it was for the TV and entertainment team. And suddenly what they got is that they found that there was an anomaly sorry, in one of the tables where one of the channels, suddenly it had not the expected volume. It seemed that that channel had disappeared for some reason. So that was raised to the channel where we have the TV and entertainment team. The team from there can go to Monte Carlo, and they were able to troubleshoot that in more detail, and they realized, oh yeah, we can see how the pattern and the distribution has been quite regular, but suddenly today something happened, and we are not getting any values for that segment of data. So that basically, the conversation follow up in Slack, sorry. And something that I like is that then all of this is also captured as part of the issue, and we can always refer and actually see whether the teams are working or are having a discussion about it. So the teams follow up with the discussion, and they troubleshoot the issue. Maybe just to clarify, actually what happened in this case is not that that channel had disappeared, is that actually they have changed the name of the channel, but something had wrong in the way that that master data is being managed and linked, and we actually had to correct different issues, or otherwise this would have caused like different issues in the reporting that we have for the TV and entertainment team. So this is one example, and is one of the issues that we have detected, but is one of examples of how we can prevent that data downtime and the impact that we talked about before. So last bit, when we talk about the framework, is about measuring. And initially, we have been focusing on just some basic measurement about adoption and engagement, because what we want to drive is that engagement from the data quality champion community. Well, this is an example for the last 2 weeks on how we are getting like a few issues. So you can see that we got 14 incidents, all of them low severity, so there was nothing big, probably just like some tables arriving a bit later than usual. And we got pretty good acknowledge alert engagement rate, 93%. That's the key metric that initially we have been looking. And also we can monitor how the time to response and the time to resolution is progressing there. So this is the basic measurement that we have in place, but we are starting to look beyond that. And the way we are thinking about it, and right now is just in design mode, but we want to really start tracking data quality itself. So for that, we are starting to define a data quality score that covers things in terms of adoption, like coverage or the number of issues that we are getting. And eventually, we want this metric to be reflective of the different dimensions of data quality. Maybe just something to explain that it was something that we learned at the beginning. When we start monitoring the number of issues, it was funny because initially that number went up, and we were a bit worried. But then we realized that it was natural in a way, because it meant that we were just detecting more. And now, after some time, in some of these pipelines, we are seeing like the number is starting to go down. So it means, like, first of all, we became aware of things that probably we were not realizing. And now we are getting a moment that we are starting in a maturity process to actually get those pipelines in a much more solid state. So yeah, measurement. And I think I already went over all of those points, but given that we covered quite a lot of points over there. I want to do like a quick recap of what are, for me, the key lessons learned. So first of all, we mentioned it a few times, engagement and adoption with that data quality champions community. This has been, for us, a game changer. And like I said, we think that observability has a strong element on cultural shift that needs to be worked with the teams. And also using measurement as a driver for behavior, right? The measurement that we do is not only just to realize how good we are getting, which is important, but it's also how we influence the teams on actually seeking those goals. Secondly, take time to look on how you configure the tool, how you design your domain structure to map your existing operating model, and make sure that you define the strategy to route the right amount level of signals and alerts to the teams. Trying to avoid alert fatiguing is also something we realized. Initially, teams were getting way too many alerts, and that was not helping, so we had to balance that. The point that we raised at the beginning, very useful also. Try to maximize all the connections that you can get to your observability platform, because the interoperability that you get there and the value that you get when you are troubleshooting issues, looking at all those data points, really help us accelerate troubleshooting and triaging incidents. And last but not least, define your strategy about how you combine deep and broad monitoring and make it dynamic, so it's a feedback loop on how you combine those two types of monitoring. So these are the key lessons learned. So then, and just to wrap up, what is next? So next, like we said, we are taking an incremental approach. So for us, it's also about how we start scaling, adding more pipelines and more products, improving the way we measure, and also something that I want to start doing, and I know there's some colleagues from Atlan here, I want to start surfacing some of these trust indicators at the point of usage. And the point of usage for us is Tableau and Atlan. We want to start surfacing some of these data quality indicators to our users. And then, in terms of what comes next, finally, and this is where everyone now is talking about, is about AI trust and readiness. So the way we are thinking about AI trust and readiness is about 3 ingredients, I would say. First of all, we keep developing and building our single source of truth on BigQuery, those business layers that I talk about. That's where we are going to connect all of our analytics and AI. Secondly, we need to fuel that data with semantic meaning and context, and that's where we are working on our Atlan data catalog. And last, what we discussed today, we have to build trust in data through data quality and observability. So thanks, everyone. That was our story in a summary way. So I don't know if we have time for questions, but if not, I'm also going to be around, probably around the 1 minute left. So if anyone wants to ask a question, but also I'm going to be around in the Monte Carlo booth. So yeah, feel free to grab me or the Monte Carlo team for any questions you may have.
Anyone like to ask any questions?